What's up, everybody? Welcome back to your favorite New York Jets subscription podcast, Badlands. I'm your host, Joe Caporoso. Final 12 pack of the regular season. I wish that we were giving a lot of meaningful predictions for a critical Jets Patriots game to the team's playoff hopes or playoffs positioning. Unfortunately, that is not the case, as this game will be watched more for draft positioning than anything. Jets currently sitting at 8. A win could put them all the way down to 12. Loss could put them all the way to 5. Pragmatically, they're probably going to pick somewhere in the 7 to 10 range. But looking at who is resting their starters this weekend, a Jets loss, there is a very real world they could be picking 5th or 6th, which is a big difference than 8 through 12 in this draft class. I'm going to give a couple thoughts on Jets Pats, going to give a couple early offseason thoughts on the Jets, also talk about the rest of the Week 18 NFL slate. And then we'll be back tomorrow with our post-game therapy, party, reaction, whatever you want to call it, depending on how the game goes. Before we dive into it, of course, have to remind you guys that the 12-pack is brought to you by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. Check them out, where you will find the best cheesesteaks this side of Philly. Freshest ingredients, including bread shipped straight from Philadelphia. Good mood food for the whole family, including fresh hand-cut fries, empanadas, tacos, salads, and much more. With something for everyone in your family. From the pickiest to the most adventurous of eaters, you will be sure to find something to make your mouth water. Save the trip to Philly and visit Chitty's Cheesesteaks at one of their multiple locations across Long Island and Queens, including in City Field. Find them online at chittyscheesesteaks.com and on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook using the handle at Chitty's Steaks. All right, let's start with Jets Pats. The over-under in this game is currently 30. Pending what the weather is likely to be, I could see this dropping to like 28 or 29 before kickoff, which feels absurd on the surface, but is probably like right on point. Like, why wouldn't this game be 12-6, 15-7, or something ridiculous like that? Pats are only 2.5-point favorites. I got to be honest, and you could put your preference about losing, winning, tanking aside. I don't know why, all things being equal, you wouldn't take the Pats minus 2.5 in this game if you're just looking at it objectively. We've seen no indication that a Robert Saleh coach team could beat a Bill Belichick coach team. And New England's not good, to be clear. They're one of the worst teams in the NFL. They've also beat the Jets this year when the Jets were healthier than they are now. The quarterback they're playing now is probably better than the quarterback they were playing previously, although they both kind of stink. But New England's been feisty enough in recent weeks. They beat Denver on the road. They beat Pittsburgh on the road. They lost by 6 to Buffalo. They were right there. They've been feistier than the Jets have been, I would say, especially based on what we saw in the Cleveland game and the Miami game. The Washington one, a little bit of an outlier, and I think if Washington plays Brissett in that game instead of Howell, the Jets probably lose by 7 to 10 points. So I just don't know why I have confidence in Trevor Siemian with a banged up offense around him going into New England against a Belichick defense, a Pats defense that's been pretty good, and scoring more than 10 points. It feels like they kind of max out at like 10 to 13 points. And that feels generous. And I could see New England, getting a couple touchdowns here, being able to run the ball a little bit and just out-coaching the Jets. And I don't know whether this will be Belichick's last game or not. I think it's more 50-50 than people are making it out to be. But ultimately, I think New England probably wins and covers in a very ugly, very low-scoring game, especially since it's only 2.5. Maybe a different conversation if it was like 4.5, but 13-10 New England, 13-7 New England kind of feels right. My guess is one of the 3 teams ahead of the Jets. It's the Giants, the Titans, and the Chargers. The Chargers are playing all the Chiefs' backups. There's a decent chance the Eagles will sit some people at some point in that game. Titans are always going to be feisty, generally. Could be Vrabel's last game there. I think if they lose, they'll get help in one of those 3 games and probably end up picking 7th. Not out of the realm of possibility they could pick 6th. So I think for your Jets mocks, safe place to look at up until we get the final answer tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow night is like the 6 to 10 range overall. Individually, the only props I would really look at in this game, always Greg Zuerlein field goals over. Always take him over the 1.5. It's more likely the Jets score 9 points on 3 field goals than score a touchdown. Garrett Wilson, 7 catches away from 100. I could see the Jets trying to get him there for whatever reason. And also he's always going to get a lot of targets no matter what. So I could see him having like 7 catches for like 44 yards with Simeon's, pop gun arm at this point. I don't want them to overuse Brees Hall in this game, especially if it's bad weather. I want that dude healthy and as fresh as possible, but I'm sure they'll just treat it like a normal game. And if that's the case, you'll be a lot of Brees, a lot of Garrett, some mediocre quarterback play, and probably like 6 to 12 points overall. And that will wrap the regular season, where the Jets will either finish with the same record they did last year or a game worse record than they did last year, and pick higher in the NFL draft. And then we can immediately pivot to offseason mode. Of course, a lot of what we'll talk about next week will be predictions and analysis of what we think is to come. I am not expecting any fireworks when it comes to the Jets on Black Friday. We had a pretty long interview with Connor Hughes on Thursday, and I agree with a lot of the stuff he said in that. It's very unlikely that Joe Douglas is going to get rid of his right and left-hand man and Chad Alexander and Rex Hogan, even though they should at least look at getting rid of one of them, because if you're not going to fire the GM, like, you have to make some improvements in the front office. And kind of similar with the coaching staff. Unless he's forced to, I don't see Saleh getting rid of Downing or Carter or demoting Hackett in any way. Maybe you get some, they get rid of Calabrese and the receiver coach, but smaller things. I'm not expecting major fireworks there. And once we get through that, all eyes will kind of turn to, the combine comes up quick, but what are the Jets going to do with Bryce Huff? I think he's going to hit the market, and that does not bode well for their chances of keeping him. I hope I'm wrong. I think they're going to move relatively quick to try to trade Zach Wilson before the league year opens. We'll talk about that in more detail in the coming weeks. I think Mekhi Becton's gone. I could see Jordan Whitehead being gone 50-50. Carl Lawson will be gone. And we'll see if they look at some other restructure situations. I do really hope they bite the bullet and just cut a guy like Lazard rather than just rolling over what has just been, an horrific contract. The Jets paid out the biggest contract to a free agent receiver in Lazard and a free agent running back in Dalvin Cook, and both were just unmitigated disasters, as Cook will be playing for the Baltimore Ravens in the playoffs, who are actually playing today as I'm recording this on Saturday. In terms of some of the, I did our usual sort of Twitter Q&A and some of the questions that we got in the Discord. Most of the draft questions, and I think this is going to be the case this year, whether the Jets pick 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, is what do you do when the top 2 receivers and the top 2 tackles are gone, which is highly likely to be the case. It's not impossible. We could go quarterback crazy, and that could kind of move things around. I think the Jets are going to take the number 3 tackle on their board, or even the number 4 tackle on their board, pending how things break in front of them. I tend to think they will address receiver well ahead of the NFL draft, or at least try to. So, Fuaga is going to be a popular pick here. They very well may like Latham better. It's early in the process. Of course, I'm going to ride with my guy Connor with his tackle rankings with Fuaga over Latham. And just from the preliminary stuff of looking into those two and seeing what we saw from Latham in his recent games, like, I don't know. I get a little PTSD with the potential Latham pick. But let's see. The Jets, I think, are taking an offensive lineman in the first round. They're going to do everything in their power to do that. Of course, shit happens and something could change and throw things off, but that's a safe position to pencil in. And even if they have to move up a couple spots, I just don't think they're leaving the first round without a tackle this year. That's what I expect. I expect a very aggressive attempt to add a big name at wide receiver in March. And then I expect an offensive lineman added in the first round in the NFL draft. And everything else around that will kind of round out the offseason, headlined by how they handle backup quarterback. So those are going to be the main things to watch. As for the final week of the NFL season, it's a weird one. We get a lot of starters resting, but there's still a lot of stuff up for grabs. You got the 2 Saturday games today. I actually think the Ravens are going to cover. I just think they'll hang around in that game. I know they're playing Huntley, but are we that sure Rudolph's that much better than Huntley? It's going to be a weather game. The Ravens want to beat the Steelers and screw with them. I just think it'll be a close game. And if I can get the Ravens at +3, that's what I'm doing. The Colts-Texans kind of feels a little bit like a coin flip. I'll go with the Texans just because I think Stroud will be able to throw the ball well in that game. And it's kind of like a coin flip. I wouldn't be shocked either way. I don't necessarily think either of these teams are going to make much noise in the playoffs when they get in. But I just like the ceiling of what Stroud brings in this game versus what Minshew could bring. Minshew could be the Jets' backup next year for all we know. But I wouldn't be shocked either way. I'm kind of more interested in pooling a couple different things together, a couple of different ones I'm doing. I have both Nico Collins and Michael Pittman parlayed together over 50 yards. I have Stroud over 200 yards, Minshew over 200 yards, Mason Rudolph over 150 yards, all pulled together, parlayed together. So that's my Saturday action. When we get into tomorrow, I do think Buffalo ultimately beats Miami. I like how they match up with Miami. Miami's so banged up. I think Buffalo ultimately wins that game, and after everything they've been through this year, is still the 2 seed, but don't have a bye, but they're still the 2 seed. It's just hard to see Miami with how banged up they are winning that game. Nothing would truly shock me, but I'm leaning Buffalo in that one. Outside of that, I don't think we're going to get any major shockers. I would not be surprised at all if Chicago is able to knock off Green Bay in that game. That's going to be a fun one to watch. A lot of the other ones are, really the games of the weekends are Colts, Texans, Bills, Dolphins. Bears, Packers is definitely up there and will be a fun one. And then we'll get into, what should be in some ways kind of a wide open playoffs. I think everyone's going to be picking Ravens, Niners, but for all these other games, we're going to see wild card weekend. You're going to see a lot of games that are complete coin flips. And we talked about this a little bit last week, but for the Jets, it was really, you needed to win 10 games and be good in the AFC to make the playoffs this year. So the Jets really were never actually that close. They just didn't handle their business in the conference, right? They have 6 wins, but 3 came in the NFC East. They struggled again in their own division. They struggled again in their conference. And the stretch that really ended their season was losing those back-to-back games to the Chargers and Raiders, two teams who aren't even, in the playoff discussion in the AFC. So I think like many Jet fans, I'm relieved that the season is over. It's kind of felt over for a few weeks now. And you go into what will be another fascinating offseason where I think the best thing you could hope for, and I've said this a few times, will be this 2015 2.0 model where the Jets are going to have to go all in to try to win next year. And that worked to an extent in 2015, right? That team won 10 games. They just didn't have the quarterback to win the big game when they needed to. That team very also easily could have won 12 or 13 games. Their 2 losses to Buffalo were 1 possession losses where they lost basically on like 1 play in each of those games. It's not like they were blown out in their losses during that season. So could that happen? It depends if you nail your transactions. Like within the vacuum of 2015, like they nailed the Brandon Marshall trade. They nailed some of the additions they made in the secondary for a very short term with Rivas, Cromartie, and Gilchrist. It all worked for like 1 year. And there was a window there for them to make a run. They just couldn't get over the hump the final game of the season. So hopefully that changes next year. But it's going to be an active offseason. And I really hope at this time next year, we're not talking about Aaron Rodgers media feuds. We're talking about playoff games and playoff implications, because now we're at a full 13 years with this drought, which is astounding and something we'll talk about in more depth as we get into the off-season mode. And we'll be busy on the feed. Check out everything from this past week. New Buck to Tread, new interview with Connor Hughes. Connor and I with our War Room, with our normal podcast. Sunday, we'll have our post-game reaction. Monday, other guys, and then we're right back into War Room. So keep the questions flowing in the Discord. We'll be busy this off-season. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Root how you choose tomorrow. Enjoy it either way, and we'll be ready to react to everything. Thank you.